So welcome everybody to our grants workshop today. This was a highly requested webinar that you all wanted to see. So we brought it back. We've actually done one other Grant Writing 101 webinar before. I partnered with another Pittsburgh friend, TJ from The Real Q. So I know we're going to put that resource in the chat for you guys, so you can also watch that. But yeah, this is kind of our reprise to that webinar. And we're going to deep dive a little bit more and give you some real world examples and resources on what it looks like to write a grant from a nonprofit's perspective. Yeah, so if you have not met me, my name is Emma Dawson. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Strategic Initiatives here at Civic Champs. I also work really closely with our second product called Mentoring Works. And a little about me, I actually studied music in college. I'm a jazz drummer. That's a big part of my identity. I also studied entrepreneurship, which led me to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm a Venture for America Fellow, and how I got connected to Civic Champs. And of course, with Civic Champs, we love to highlight, different nonprofits and volunteering opportunities. And so I'm a proud volunteer with Hit Like a Girl, Western PA Diaper Bank, the Education Partnership, and the Missouri Fine Arts Academy. Of course, a huge fan of STEM Coding Lab as well. And so I'll actually pass it over to our co-host, Hannah Kirshner, who's going to tell you a little bit more about herself.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. And we're a huge fan of Civic Champs too. Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm the development manager from STEM Coding Lab. My bachelor's is in theater business, which is basically business admin and marketing, with a minor in design and tech. So we've got lots of arts backgrounds here. Um, I actually got started in the nonprofit world during my college experience working with the Latrobe Arts Center. And then during the pandemic, while working with Next Star Media Group, I worked with United Way and SafeNet and several other nonprofits that were working on getting messages out during that time. I've been with the company now for about a year, and I'm an Erie native turned Yinzer, and I love it here in the city. So
That's great. I did not realize you also came from an arts bachelor degree, so
yeah.
super cool. But yeah, okay. So today, Hannah and I are going to go through these different kinds of, let's say, chapters in our workshop. First, we're going to tell you all just some basics to what is a grant, different types of grants, tell you a little bit more about some resources for researching grants, give you some first steps to writing. If you're one of those people that have not written a grant before, this might be a particularly interesting piece to the webinar for you. And then last, we'll go through the components of grant writing. We have some free resources that we're going to share with you and, really deep dive into that process today. And then stay until the end because we have different freebies that we want to pass out to everybody that's been a part of this workshop today. And we'll also spend some time answering questions at the end. Of course, we have Chloe from Civic Champs who will be sending different resources out throughout the presentation in our comments. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments or in the chat, but we may, answer them during the presentation or after. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started here with our presentation. And so just to start and give you guys, a big scale scope of grants, in 2022, over $105 billion were donated to nonprofits from different foundations. So lots of money out there. Yeah, and then if we scope in particular to Pittsburgh, which is where Hannah and I both reside, in 2022 alone, private foundations dispersed over $18 million to different nonprofits. And so there are so many grants out there that are specifically for nonprofits to take advantage of. And I hope this just helps give you a point of view, right, that there's money out there for you, and we want to help you get that for your org. Yeah, and then in particular, we want to share some stats about volunteerism and grants. So, 1 in 3 funders actually have never received funding requests for volunteer engagement. But from a poll here, you can see that 70% of funders connect volunteerism to a stronger civil society, and 55% of funders believe volunteer engagement improves the organization's capacity to make connections with people and within the community. So, based on these stats alone, right, funders want to see you write about volunteerism. They want to see that story captured. And so, yeah, we want to just make sure you all know that Civic Champs is a resource that you can definitely take advantage of when you're thinking about writing volunteerism or mentorship into your grants. And so, yeah, just a plug here, we've definitely helped tons of different folks, including STEM Coding Lab, write grants and win money. And so, if this is something you're interested in exploring with us, we would love to help you. This is free to you all, just a service that we provide to our nonprofit customers or folks that would like to become customers. So, yeah, we'll leave this here. We can talk about it later, of course. But yeah, to the definitions, I would love to pass it to Hannah to tell us a little bit more about, what a grant really is.
So what is a grant? A grant is funds that orgs receive that are not expected to be repaid. So unlike a loan, you're not going to be giving anything back. Grants may be awarded by state or local agencies, private foundations, or corporations. And grant writing is the process in order to get those grants. So in order to be awarded a grant, your organization must write and submit a proposal to be eligible for receiving funding. A grant proposal typically will request funding in order to support activities and programs that are consistent with a nonprofit's organization mission.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So now that we know a little bit more about what a grant is and what grant writing is, I'd love to take you all through 6 different types of grants. These are what we have for you all today, but of course, there are definitely more types of grants that you could research. But first, just to share some definitions, a type of grant is that program development support type of grant. And so I think this one in particular is really popular with nonprofit grant writing. This is a grant that provides funding for specific projects or programs. Hannah's actually going to give an example of one of these with STEM Coding Lab in a second. But think about a particular new project maybe that your nonprofit wants to start or a new program that you're wanting to, have funding for. This is the type of grant you should really be researching. The second is capital funding support. This is mainly for, physical projects like building construction, property acquisition, or similar expansion kinds of campaigns. So if you fall into that category, make sure you're researching that. The third here is in-kind donation grants. So this is actually grants that are provided for assistance in a non-monetary form. So you can think about this as a donation of supplies, free consulting, maybe legal services to your organization. So yeah, if those are different kinds of resources that you're in need of, make sure you're looking up in-kind donation. The fourth, I would say, is the kind of grant that we at Civic Champs definitely help the most in writing, which is general operating support. This, of course, everyone needs, but this kind of grant helps you with, the different staff, helping pay them. It can help with other kinds of building expenses, but anything you could really think about for operating support can go under this kind of grant. The fifth is matching grants. So if you've heard that before, this really is that kind of grant that matches a specific dollar amount to funds, but only if you comply to the rules of a matching grant, like raising the same amount of money yourself. You can also think about matching grants in the sense of volunteer hours. And so perhaps a grant says if you have 100 volunteer hours in the next 2 months, we'll match that by $200 or something like that. And then the last one here is research grants. And so if you're a nonprofit that in particular helps with research, with academic achievement or scientific discoveries. This could be a really good resource for you to obtain funds. Um, but yeah, in particular, going back to number 5, Civic Champs actually has done a whole workshop on matching grants and how you can, utilize your story, to get more funding from a matching grant. And so we'll put these links in the chat for you, but feel free to check that out at another time. All right, so I'll pass it to Hannah to tell you about the 2 different types of grants that I just talked about and some real world examples.
Thanks, Emma. So these are 2 examples from STEM Coding Lab. Remake Learning Moonshot Grant, or a program development support, is one that we actually partnered with Civic Champs on. And it's a collaborative project creating computer science activity packets and digital learning modules for a pilot cohort of adult mentors who will then introduce the children they mentor to the principles and practice of computer science. So you can see it's a very clearly defined project versus general operating support from the Pittsburgh Foundation. They help to support SEL's general operating expenses at all locations we provide CS education through, instead of focusing on a specific project or program. So a general operating support is going to be much less restricted.
Yeah, great different examples here. These are both public and in the news as well, so you can definitely look up more about the Moonshot Grant as well as the Pittsburgh Foundation funding that SCL has received. But hope that shares just a little bit more to an insight of what those types of grants can look like for you. All right, so now that we've gone through some basics, let's talk about what that looks like to actually research a grant. So, we wanted to just throw a lot of different kinds of resources on this slide for you. Feel free to look at the slides after today. We're going to send out this recording to all of you, by the way. But essentially, these are all different research engines that you could be taking advantage of. So if you've never written a grant and you're like, I don't even know where to start, I would really start with one of these places that can also filter based on different kinds of types of grants that you're looking for, as well as the different kinds of, I don't know, themes and stories that you may apply for. But Hannah, any of these spark joy for you or any advice you have on these different resources?
Yeah. Emma, can you, yeah, there we go. I was gonna say, can you back out and come back in? Um, yeah, so I would say grantmakers.io is a really good resource. Some of these there you will notice are more up to date than others, so you do have to do your homework. But grantmakers.io uses some tools to make sure that their information is up to date. So that's definitely one that I would recommend.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I've used Instrumental before as well, and so I would recommend that one to everyone, and I'll actually share some more about our partnership there in a second. But yeah, Hannah, you want to walk us through different places too?
So different grants have different restrictions. So there are national grants which you can compete for all across the country, depending on where your organization exists, such as the Just Grants that's mentioned here. There's also state grants, which means if you are in a state such as Pennsylvania, you should be looking for Pennsylvania grants. Then there are private foundation grants like the R.K. Mellon Foundation or other family foundations and organizations. These are typically going to be specific to areas of interest and also geographical areas. So they typically have interest areas as well as corporate, which will typically have interest areas. Something like Comcast, they typically fund programs that are within the areas that their organizations exist. Corporate is also good to note for in-kind, which we mentioned previously about services and goods. You may be able to not only compete for monetary grants through corporations, but something like Comcast may provide laptops, which they've done for us.
Oh, that's super cool. That's good to know. And yeah, if you guys are interested like in the specifics of RK Mellon or Comcast, we'll definitely, be a resource to you if you want to talk out those particular groups more with us. All right, and then just some general tips that we wanted to list out here for you all. Like I said, Civic Champs is actually a partner with Instrumental. So everyone on this call actually gets a coupon code of $50 off for your first month. So you're welcome to take advantage of that and see if it works for you. And yeah, a couple other tips, right? Look at your organization's archives of grants. If you are new to your organization and someone was previously in that grant writer role, reach out to them and ask them if they have any drafts or any other kinds of templates or resources that they used. So you don't have to start from scratch. And then we could not stress enough how important it is for you all to really start getting connected with your local foundations and your nonprofit friends in your community, right? It's going to be word of mouth for a lot of different kinds of advice, depending on where you live. But yeah, look at your different local foundations, schedule meetings with your program managers, and look up different networking events or networks and memberships that you could be a part of in your community. So you just know what's going on and you start to make face in your community a little bit so people know, oh yeah, I talked to Hannah, right? They have a great mission about, helping students connect to STEM resources. So it just always helps, right, to network. And then lastly, work smarter and not harder by recycling different grants that you've written. For the most part, and Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the operational funding that you're going to ask for, that narrative will generally stay the same. Your mission is going to stay the same. The kinds of things that you want funding for operational, like staff funding, is going to stay the same. So you can really copy paste with different grants.
Yeah, the best advice that I've received is you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You're
Yeah.
if you're changing your mission every time, and they're gonna question that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Alrighty, folks. So now we'll give you just a couple of resources for starting the first steps in writing. So yeah, we've gone through what it looks like to maybe take those first steps in research, and now we'll give you some tips for writing.
So some helpful places to start. Utilize software support. So whether it's Google Workspace or Google Suite resources that you have, or other softwares that you have at your disposal, there's a lot of information that you're tracking, and so you really want to make sure that you have the tools to do so. Um, you will also most likely need to have financial statements, like an income statement from the past year, information on your team and board of directors, your impact story basics like your mission and vision statements, and portfolio examples. So, some examples of past work you've done. Sometimes they want to see photos of it, sometimes they want descriptions. Having all of those things on hand will set you up for success. And then also making sure your website and social media pages are up to date, because they're probably going to go and review them, and they want to know that you're, a real organization and that you are trustworthy. And also if you are receive funding from them, you'll probably be required to um, give them some form of recognition. So they're going to want to make sure that your, social media and website are kept up to date.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think that's one of the most valuable things that you can do is really staying updated on your different media platforms. Because yeah, like just like in the real world, that's one of the first places people go to like check out what's going on and if you're legit. So, yeah, you can have all of this already prepped and ready for your org's grants. And then, yeah, just a couple other tips here. Copy the grant into your own workspace. For people that have already written grants, you may have already done this, but for folks that have never written, this is just a great place to start. You can have it where you don't have to, be afraid that you're going to lose your information in a different tab. And then our recommendation is that you guys really save all of your drafts. Don't be deleting different paragraphs and sections that you've written. Instead, just continue to create new drafts in a folder. because you never know when that information may be valuable in other grants. And you can just copy and paste, right? Don't reinvent the wheel, recycle what you've already created. And then the last piece of advice here that we have is just to review the previous winners. See what kind of stories that this foundation or this state fund are really giving money towards, and see if you can kind of manipulate your story to be similarly written, so that you have more success in the long run. I would also say don't be afraid to reach out to previous winners. For the most part, people want to help, and I've done that in the past as well. Okay, so we'll move on to the components of grant writing. This is where we're going to spend the bulk of our presentation today. So I'm excited to get into this with you all. So, first and foremost, Civic Champs has created this free nonprofit grant proposal guide for each and every one of you. And so we're going to put those links in the chat right now. Also, if you're having any difficulty, please say so in the chat and we'll make sure you get access to these. But essentially, this is a place where you can, have a one-stop shop resource that will help you organize yourself and organize different components that we expect you'll see in the grant writing process. And so today, Hannah and I are actually going to go back and forth and go through this one-stop shop resource and different components to grant writing that you should expect when you're going to write. All right, so I'll go first here. We want you to use our template. You write out all of the different key contributors that you may have with your grant. And so if you're looking, in a different tab right now at the template, you'll see this table that has name, role, expectations, all those different kinds of things. And this just really, no-brainer helps clear up communication for your organization. So you can see in this example that, you can write that Sarah is going to be the main grant writer and her expectation is to, be the main point of contact. She'll be the one that starts from beginning to end, submits. But then you can see John will also be, a contributor, but he's going to provide accurate and up-to-date volunteer stats to then send to Sarah. When Hannah and I wrote our grant together, this was something that we also clarified, right? That Hannah was going to be the one that submitted this at the end of the time that we spent partnering, but that we would check in every day to actually make sure we're on top of all of our different writing expectations. Great. And then when we think about key contributors, I want you all to really think about your network and who could actually help you write this grant. So utilize your volunteers. You may have somebody that volunteers for your nonprofit that is an excellent writer that wants to help you in that way. You may have board members that can help contribute to grant writing, or you may have other nonprofit friends that would be interested in aiding in this process. So yeah, don't feel like, I'm the only person that can write this grant for my nonprofit. You probably have other people in your network that would be happy to help you, that may not be on your staff. And then as far as collaborators, so like Hannah and I have mentioned, we've been collaborators on a Moonshot grant, and Civic Champs has been that tech provider that's listed here. But you may want to take advantage of, partnering with your city or partnering with other nonprofits or national organizations, depending if the grant wants to see partnerships. And so, yeah, these are just a list of examples you can be thinking about.
So timeline. So this is really about how are you going to stay accountable? Um, you Are there going to be expectations of if you win the grant? The answer is probably yes. There's going to be quarterly reports of some sort. Sometimes it's just a final report at the end. Sometimes it's an inner report. Sometimes you have to, they're asking that you're meeting with them. So understanding those expectations and putting those deadlines in some kind of calendar and timeline for yourselves is really important. But also data tracking. So what are the things that you've promised to deliver on? And are you checking on them at, quarterly stages? There may also be multiple submission timeline requirements, so you may, again, need to check in throughout the process. Um, Most grants require, again, a final report, but there may be other things to look forward to keep in mind. Um, and when processing those metrics, it's important to make sure that whatever you've promised, you're able to deliver. Then also on the side of grant information, you should know what the grant is asking for and be prepared when you're filling it out um, to to fill in that information and keep record of what you've actually submitted and reported.
Yeah, that's great, Hannah. I think, like, to add to this, right? This is really just a template resource for you all. So it's a place to dump all of this information so that other staff members on your team or volunteers that are helping you write know where to look for the link for the grant or even when it's due. It's just that one-stop shop that you can be taking advantage of. Great. So the next section in there is organizational background. Almost every grant that I've seen asks some sort of question around, tell us about yourself. What's your main mission? How are you connected to our grant? And so we created this in the template. Some tips here. You should be able to grab your mission statement straight from your website. I did so with STEM Coding Lab right here. And so if you do not already have your mission statement on your website, that's a great place to put it so that you could just plug and chug that into any grant you have. And then as far as connecting to the grant, a tip here is to actually look at the funder's strategic plan and match your story and match your mission statement story to the specific asks that they want to fund. So I gave an example here. Maybe let's say the Pittsburgh Foundation has written that they particularly want to fund programs that are going to help with youth voice, partnerships in the Pittsburgh area, and incorporate STEM programming. So immediately you can have this written down and start to think about, okay, how does my mission at STEM Coding Lab connect to those three criteria that the strategic plan had, laid out for me?
So budget. You're gonna need a budget. So you're gonna have to clarify. First, you need to know what you're asking for. What are your requirements for funding? If you're asking for a project, what are you asking? What are the expenses tied to that you're gonna need to cover? And why? Why are you asking for this specifically from this funder? You're also gonna need to know if you have other sources of funding. So if you have other grantors or donations that you're going to use to cover this, and whether or not they've been received or are still pending as well. You may be, and be prepared, you may be asked to answer those questions. What are you going to do if you don't receive that funding? Is this program going to continue even if you don't? Do you have a plan B? You also need to know where your operating budget and operating revenue sheets exist. You're going to need to provide some financial data to establish yourself as a trustworthy organization and show that your records are sound. They also want to know that that you have the financials to maintain, and if they needed to do an audit themselves, they can review that and make sure that their money is going to be well spent. Many organizations also have a template that they will provide as part of this process, and that is the format that they're going to want you to follow. Sometimes they can be vastly different. One organization might want to see specifics and one may want something more general. So it's important before you start this process to review what they're asking.
Yeah, that's excellent. It's a great point that it's always going to be different, but they're always going to ask. So this is a great place to start inside our template just to organize yourself. But know exactly what Hannah said, right? They will provide a template most likely for you all, and it's, your job to be able to provide that for them. All right, so the next section in there in our template is this project info section. This is a place where you can really start to share your story of how you're going to use the funding. And so it's super important that you have a really clear and compelling story inside of this statement of need for a grant. And one of the resources we wanted to share today is SMART Goals framework. And so if you're not familiar with SMART Goals, it's just a way of writing that could be really helpful for you all. But essentially, a SMART goal is one that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And so often, the more specific and data-driven your story and project information can be, the more likely you will be to receive the grant. And a tip we have here is to utilize, AI, Chat GPT, to help you really be as concise as possible. Don't shy away from technologies that could really help you here. So, for example, there's a little bit more of a long-winded version of a story on the left, and through, AI, we were able to narrow it down to be a little bit more compelling on the right. But in general, with SMART goals, here are some examples. I'm not going to spend time reading through these with you all, but you're welcome to take a look at these after our presentation today and just learn a little bit more about what that writing style is. But ultimately, right, you just want to be as clear and data driven as possible when you're sharing what your story is and why you want the funding.
So, outlining the methods and criteria that will be used to assess the success and impact of the proposed project or program is especially important. So, going back to what Emma just said about SMART goals, you need to know how you're going to be delivering that. An example from STEM Coding Lab, we deal with students. So, a bad example would be just saying students appeared engaged versus a good example would be saying students completed an assessment, and the number of students that expressed interest in a specific question set was over 50%. Um, you you have a clear area of evaluation. You know how you're going to record that information, and you have a plan for it. And you know that you can achieve that before your final report or interim reports are due, depending on the information. So again, how will you track and measure those activities? How are you going to know that you're succeeding in your goals when you're checking at those quarterly marks? And are there specific metrics you need to track for your board? So you may be reporting on things to the grantor, but your board or internal KPIs may also require other information to know that you're being successful.
Yeah, and in particular here, right, if you are writing a grant that has to do with volunteerism or mentorship, we would be more than happy to support you with that, and, give you that data that you may need for this evaluation piece of a grant. All right, so some final pieces in our template include a grant review section and an appendix. So really my biggest advice here when you're reviewing your grant is schedule a meeting with a grant manager or a program manager that, is helping make that funding decision. Um, I have always had really positive conversations with program managers in the past. They want to help you. I think they wished more people reached out to them to have just a 15-minute call or check-in, because ultimately they want to give this money to people in need. And so, yeah, that's like one of my biggest takeaways from this whole presentation is to always schedule a meeting and ask your questions before you submit. And then as far as the appendix section inside of this template, you never know if a grant is going to ask you for particular requirements of supporting materials. And so if you already are keeping track of all of that before you have to submit, it just helps you organize yourself. But a couple examples you may want to put in your appendix might be, your tax status information, your personal team's bios, letters of support, research that you use to write your narrative. Yeah, so these are all different things. In particular, for Hannah and I with STEM Coding Lab and Civic Champs, we created a memorandum of understanding. And so that's something, of course, that grants may want to see from a partnership as well.
So just some extra tips, again, going off of what Emma just said, stay timely in your ongoing conversations with program managers and stakeholders. Um, the worst thing you can do is to take the money and ghost everyone. You want to be following up on a regular basis, even if it's in an informal report or just an email, giving your both your funders and your stakeholders some form of constant communication throughout the process is important. Um, and you know, is more likely to lead to a renewal of funding when it comes to your next proposal. Um, but also send thank yous and follow-up emails, um, recognize what they've done. Make sure you're also doing the recognition that you've promised that you would do. So if it's a social media post, if that's if that's mentioning them in your newsletter and using the logo or putting it on their website, and keep track of what comes next. So follow-up surveys, cohort requirements, or as Emma said, MOUs. Making sure you're following your contract agreements, and then don't be afraid to sprint and submit. So if you're worried that it's not exactly perfect and your proposal isn't exactly what you want it to be, go for it. And as long as you are using information that is deliverable and is true, not something that made up or lying about, but as long as the information is true, the worst thing they can do is say no. And you can try again later, but if nobody else is trying, then you might be awarded that. And it may be a lot stronger than you're feeling just because you're newer to the process. Also, don't be afraid to make changes or engage with the grant writers, with the funders as you're going through the process. If you've spent your money down before your end of year, but if your grant period, let's say, lasts until December, but you've already spent it by June, engage with the grant funders and see if you can submit a report early and compete for the next cycle instead of waiting a full year. A lot some may tell you no, but a lot are going to say, yeah, I mean, if you've provided us the documentation that we need, let's, go ahead and get started on another proposal.
Yeah, that's great advice. Like you might as well ask, right? And you're already building relationships with them, and so it should be comfortable in that way. I know when Hannah and I were talking before this presentation, we both had that kind of like sense of anxiety when we submitted our first grants. But the process, after you submit one or two, will start to feel very natural to you. And know everyone has gone through that process of being scared to submit the first one. But it really is that hurdle that, we want to help you jump. All right, so we are going to wrap up here, give you guys a little bit more time to your lunch hour. But yeah, we'll give you some freebies and some takeaways here. First, with takeaways, I've written down 6 here. But of course, look back at the presentation and click in to our template to take your own takeaways from today. But the first one is really know what type of grant fits your type of ask. Think back at those 6 type of grants that we went through today and which one that your org is really wanting to compete for. The second, utilize partners in grant writing, whether that's a software service that can help manage your grant, whether that's, a software that helps research your grant, or key collaborators or contributors that can help write your grant. Think about partnerships throughout the whole process. Number 3, use our template. This is a free resource for you. Play around inside of that and see if it could be something that helps you, gather all the data that you need to be successful. Number 4, get to know the funders in your city. I recommend looking up different memberships or networking opportunities that may help you get to know new people in your city that can help recommend different funds for you in your nonprofit. Number 5, when in doubt, meet with your program managers. They're there for you. And number 6, document everything. That's why we've created this template. That's why we recommended copy and pasting all of the different drafts that you write, because you never know when it's going to be helpful for you to recycle grant information, or when people are going to want to look back at the different things that you said you'd report on. All right, so yeah, that is the end of our presentation. We would love to stay in touch with you. We went through a lot of different kinds of pieces of resources today, and so if anything is unclear or if you would just like to chat about a particular grant you're writing, I know Hannah and I would both be happy to meet with you. And so I believe Chloe is putting our resources, yep, in the chat. So feel free to email us or connect with us so we can further the conversation with you individually. And I'll pass it to Hannah to talk a little bit about STEM Coding Lab here too.
Yeah, so if you're unfamiliar with us, we are a nonprofit based out of Pittsburgh that's providing computer science education to K through eighth graders in the area. We work in school, after school, and other settings. Summer, we have a cyber bus that travels around, and we just launched a virtual platform. Um, if you have interest in getting involved, we have classroom assistants, guest speakers, event volunteers, and more. If there's something specific that you do, let's say you're a really good photographer or some kind of skill, we're happy to assess all types of volunteers, and we use Civic Champs for our volunteer platform. Um, you can also join our newsletter. I believe Chloe's going to send that link out as well, or follow our social media. You can see those aspects here. Um, I'd always be remiss as a development manager if I didn't mention it, but you can always donate or host a fundraiser for us. And if you'd like information on that, feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. All right, so yeah, follow them too. Follow them on all their different socials. Yeah, from my perspective here, Civic Champs wants to give you this resource for free. So if you weren't able to click into that earlier, make sure, to click this and save this as a free resource for you, whether it's through Canva or Google Docs. And yeah, just for being here today, we're actually providing each one of you a 2-month free discount to our platforms, Mentoring Works and Civic Champs. So STEM Coding Lab actually takes advantage of both of these different products, and we'd both be happy to share more details on what that looks like. But yeah, you all have this special discount just for being in this presentation with us today. All right, so yeah, we love doing webinars and educational programming with different partners. And so we have a couple more lined up, and you guys can click in to sign up for these as well. But on March 7th, we're going to do one around how to grow your volunteer program through social media with Julia Campbell. She's excellent. On March 14th, we're going to do one with Tammy Zonker on making the case for investment in volunteerism. I think that could really be a good resource for grant writing, honestly, and thinking about your narrative. And then March 21st, we're going to do one with Instrumental, which is that grant research provider, for finding that good fit funder for your volunteer program in under 60 minutes. So yeah, I think actually all three of these really apply to the conversation we had today. So feel free to sign up for these as well as a free resource for you all. Um, but yeah, that is the end of our presentation. We appreciate you all being here. And we'll take a couple minutes to answer any questions people have. So I'm looking at the comments right now, but also feel free to come off mute if you have a question you want us to talk through. Great. It's great to see people are found it informative. That's great. Maya, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had another meeting and I that ran late and I wasn't able to attend this most of this. But I was wondering, I noticed that you're recording it. Would it be
Yeah.
possible to get the recording in order
Yeah.
to be able to?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for asking. We're going to send this out to every person that registered for this. Um,
Awesome.
and we'll send you links to all the resources that we put in the comments too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. Glad you could join at the end here.
Thank you.
I think we also had a question from Gail on nonprofits seeking grants while waiting for 501(c)(3) status. Emma, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to this first, but
Yeah, I think, in particular, that's a question you really want to ask the funder that you're working with, whether or not they'll be compliant to that request. I've not been in that particular scenario before with a partner. But yeah, if you have the proof that you're in the process and you're pending 501(c)(3) status, and you know they require it, I think that's just a conversation that you're going to want to clarify. For the most part, I think people are going to be pretty understanding. But yeah, I think as long as you have proof that you're in that process, I think people will be understanding of it.
Yeah,
Anything else? Yeah.
yeah, I will also say I've not worked with this situation specifically. But what I can tell you is typically they will ask for a fiscal if you have a fiscal sponsor or something else. You can partner with another organization or with a nonprofit that does have 501(c)(3) status. Um, there are resources out there that can, that can help you identify ones in your community. And if you want some more information on that, I'd be happy to help engage with you to finding that offline.
I appreciate that. Just one more follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
In seeking 50 C3 status, I've read a lot about there seems to be a little bit of debate over whether you do the easy form, whether you do the long form. Have you heard of anyone not approving a grant because it was given, people applied using the easy form?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have not seen that issue before. Um, no, I would have to do a little bit more research myself, Gail, to think about that. But no, I mean, as far as any kind of grant that I've helped write, typically they'll just ask for like a PDF download of what that certificate of a 501(c)(3) status looks like for you. And whether you do it either way that you just described, I think it would be okay. But no, I've not seen that kind of challenge with any of the grants I've written. Hannah, any advice there? Sorry, Gail, I know that's not super helpful, but I can also look into that and email you after this.
Yeah, I think typically the best advice I can offer is that um more information is only better if it is good information. So if it's if it's a bunch of rambling to kind of fill space, that's not going to be helpful either. But if it is a more thorough, if that longer version is more thorough, that may be appreciated as long as that information is written in a way that, that is adding value to your proposal.
Hmm.
I love that, Hannah. Thank you very much. Thank
Yeah,
you,
of course.
Emma.
Yeah, of course. It looks like Deborah also chimed in the chat that you could do fiscal sponsorship as an option when you're, applying for 501(c)(3) status or if it's pending. So thank you, Deborah, for adding that insight. Cool. Any other questions, folks, before we head? All right. Well, it was a pleasure being a part of this call. Hannah, thank you again for co-hosting. It was really great doing this with you. But yeah, let's talk offline if anybody else has questions. But we hope you guys all have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, Emma, and it was a great co-hosting with you. Um, have a good
Thanks,
evening
Hannah.
or have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.